IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. And we're going to call this Championship Week Kickoff, Trev. We are kicking off our coverage of the national championship game between the Ohio State Buckeyes and your Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Guys, oh man, what a week, Trev. What a week. We're going to have a lot for people. We're going to go live at least every day except possibly Sunday. We're going to be live, including next Monday. A lot of stuff in store for y'all this week. I'm excited about it. I know Trev is excited about it. We're sitting there chomping at the bit. Just want to give you guys a quick rundown on what we're going to discuss this week and then today. So that way everybody knows we're going to be going live at 1 o'clock every day during the week, Monday to Friday. Saturday will probably be 1 o'clock as well, but, weekends are always a little bit different, so we'll let you guys know. Today, we're going to talk about, we're just going to kind of kick off what this game means, right? What's at stake for Notre Dame, what this game means in a lot of different ways. We'll dive into our first look at Ohio State. We're going to talk also about the new portal pickups today. We're going to do a much deeper dive into the portal players after the season is over, but we are going to give a little bit of a breakdown of the guys that they got this past week, I should say. And tomorrow, our focus is going to be strictly on the offense, Notre Dame defense against the Ohio State offense. We'll kind of preview the Ohio State offense, talk about their players, their stats, where they rank. We'll get into how they stack up against the Notre Dame defense. We'll probably talk some different personnel aspects of it. Wednesday, we'll flip it. We'll talk about the Notre Dame offense and the Ohio State defense. We'll break those aspects of it down. Thursday, we'll do sort of our 5 reasons why we believe Notre Dame is going to win, what are our biggest concerns, and then we'll talk game records. And then Friday, we're going to sort of do a little special segment. Right now, it's matchups that matter. We may talk a little bit about that those next 2 days and then throw something else in there if there's some news that's come up. And then we will do a buy, sell, hold. So Friday we'll have a short little segment at the beginning, and then we'll do a buy, sell, hold. So Salty, if you're listening, Wednesday, you could actually put it up Wednesday, dude, and then we'll get a ton of them on there. We're going to do a special buy, sell, hold instead of a mailbag. And then Saturday, we plan on doing our Keys to Victory show and our prediction show on Saturday. Right now, we don't have anything planned for Sunday. We wanted to leave a day for things that may come up, or if nothing comes up, we may need a day of rest. We may need a Sabbath this week of breakdowns. And then, of course, Monday we'll do a pregame show. We'll sort of do a deep, like we did, before the playoff games. We'll do that. We'll do a postgame show. Contemplating doing something during the game. I haven't decided on that yet. And then, of course, on Tuesday we'll do upon further review. So these next 9 days, Trevor, are going to be jam-packed with nothing but Notre Dame against Ohio State, and I cannot wait for it. And we'll kick things off with this, Trevor, looking at this matchup. And here's something that I said, and I want to talk about this to begin. I said this on Twitter the day after the game. I wrote an article about it. And this is where we're going to kind of kick things off. What you have in the championship game are the 2 best teams in college football. And what I mean by that, I do not mean this. I do not mean, well, of course they did what they needed to do, and they're here because they're so clear they're 2. No, like when the Giants beat the Patriots in what's the second Super Bowl that they beat the Patriots, and they were like 9-7. They were the hottest team in the NFL. They weren't the best team in the NFL. And the best teams don't always win or play for the championship. And when I mean best, I'm talking about who were the best teams over the course of the entire season. Obviously, they were the 2 best in the postseason. That's why they got there. And neither team got the benefit of someone else doing the dirty work for them. Like, they didn't get the benefit of somebody else knocking off Oregon for Ohio State or Arizona State upsetting Texas. And so they didn't have to play Oregon and Texas. They didn't get the benefit of Notre Dame didn't get the benefit of Boise obviously they had to play Georgia in round 2. They didn't get the benefit of getting Boise State in their second round the way that Penn State did. They also didn't get the benefit of Boise State upsetting Penn State. So then after Georgia, you don't have to play Boise. You don't have to play Penn State, which, let's be honest, would have been a much easier – not much. It would have been an easier game for Notre Dame to win if it was Boise State instead of Penn State. They both had to earn their way here. Both teams also had one bad day. in the season. Michigan with their embarrassing loss to an 8-win Michigan Ohio State with their embarrassing loss to an 8-win Michigan team that honestly wasn't very good. And of course, Notre Dame losing early in the season to a Northern Illinois team they had no business losing to. Outside of that, these are the two most dominant teams of college football. Both rank in the top 12 in scoring offense. Notre Dame is one of only 3 teams, along with Indiana and Ole Miss, to rank in the top 10 in both scoring offense and scoring defense. Ohio State's just outside of it. Ohio State has the number 1 scoring defense in college football. Notre Dame has the number 2 scoring defense in college football. Notre Dame is 1 and 2, and Ohio State are 1 and 2 in the Football Power Index. They're 1 and 2 in the Fermo Efficiency Index, and they're 1 and 2 in the Sagarin ratings, which takes a look at like all the efficiency numbers. Over the course of the season, these are the 2 best teams. They didn't have the 2 best resumes, which is why they were the 7 seed and the 8 seed. But these are the 2 best teams all season. And I think it's fitting that in the first year of a 12-team playoff, we're actually getting what I believe to be over the course of from the August 31st until now, what were the 2 best teams in college football outside of them both having one really bad day. And I think that is exciting. And it's also exciting that Notre Dame is part of that, where they are genuinely looking and say, hey, look, now this triggered some Penn State fans who still think Penn State's better and others. But I think there's no doubt about it, Trev, when this game kicks off, whoever wins, whoever loses, these are the 2 best teams in college football. There's no Cinderella TCU. There's no upset story. These are the 2 best teams in college football.
Yeah, I don't think there's any better way that you could draw this up. Right. Like we've been talking this week a lot about parallels, right? Brian, you and I have talked about that a lot and just the similarities that both of these teams have gone through, right? Both had transfer portal quarterbacks in the offseason that they picked up, both with question marks, right? There was a lot of speculation around each defense, like how good they were going to be. I don't mean speculation in a bad way, right? Ohio State, they lose Marvin Harrison Jr. and they lose a couple of offensive linemen to the draft. And, it's like, what's this going to look like for them? And very similar conversations around Notre Dame. They lose Joe Alt. They lose Blake Fisher, right? They had a mass wave of wide receivers enter the transfer portal, so they lost some offensive weapons as well. So there's a lot of talk around what these 2 teams were going to look like. And the reason why I'm so happy that this year went to a 12-team format is there was always so much speculation around, of course, teams 5 and 6 were, we could have competed for a national championship. And the resounding answer is always, well, I mean, obviously not, because you weren't one of the top 4 deserving teams in the country, right? But I think one thing that this playoff showed is you don't have to be a top 4 deserving team in the country to play for a playoff. You have to play well in the postseason. That's what these 2 teams did. And I think there's no better way to kick off the 12-team format than with these 2 teams, right? 2 teams that in a 4-team playoff, those losses to Northern. Now, there's a lot of conversation around what would have happened with Notre Dame in a 4-team playoff. I'm under the assumption that they still would have been in it because their bad loss was early. But you look at Ohio State, you lose to a Michigan team like that in the final week of the regular season, and you don't play in your conference championship. That's a death sentence. Mm-hmm. You're out of the 4-team playoff, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no different path of maybe this team could lose and you could sneak in. And so I'm happy that the way the 12-team playoff format is, we talked about it a lot at the start of the year, is the great thing about the playoffs is if you think you deserve a spot in the national championship in the semifinals, you now have the opportunity to go out and prove it on the football field. And Ohio State and Notre Dame did both of that. So, dude, I mean, we loaded into the show and I said, how good it feels that the title of this show is National Championship Review.
With Notre Dame in it.
With Notre Dame.
We were going to do a national championship preview no matter what. It was just nice to be one that's dedicated towards Notre Dame in there and championship preview. I mean, Trev, to your point, like there's been a narrative that like neither one of these teams would have made a 14 playoff, and I'm like, no, that's I think a flawed argument. Well, they weren't ranked in the top 4. You're projecting something onto the committee that they didn't have to deal with. The committee didn't have to make the decision of do we drop one of the conference championship teams out of the top 4. They didn't have to, because of the format of the 12-team playoff, because 2 conference champions were going to raise above them anyway. So you had Oregon 1, Georgia 2. They were fine. Those 2 teams deserved the 1 and 2 seeds based on the current format. And then you knew that 3 and 4, seeded teams were going to be somebody that won a conference championship, and there was no need to kind of finagle that. we have seen in the past that if a team was 4 and lost their conference championship or had some sort of injury, they would have dropped out. We don't know how the committee would have handled Carson Beck's injury in a 14 playoff, because in a 14 playoff, there is no automatic bid. We don't know that Georgia would have still been in with Carson Beck's obvious. I mean, the committee knew that he was out. They didn't have to consider that in this. Like, I kept seeing a lot of Florida State fans being like, well, Carson, is the committee going to stand true to their word and not put Georgia in? Like, they left. Oh, guys, you do realize they won their conference championship, right? Like, they're kind of in. It's apples to oranges. I think Notre Dame probably gets in at 4 over Penn State in a 14 playoff, but Ohio State doesn't get in. And again, that's part of the give and take you have to have. So some people say, well, this shows that the regular season doesn't matter because Ohio State could lose to Michigan and Notre Dame could lose to Northern Illinois and still get in. And my answer is there's always give and take. There is nothing that's perfect. But the amount of games that mattered in November at the time is so much greater than before that I'm willing to accept the fact that an Ohio State can lose to a Michigan. Because here's the thing. They can lose to Michigan all they want, but they still had to win 3 games over good teams, over the number 9 seed, over the number 1 seed, and over the number 5 seed to get in, who was the 4th-ranked team. So they had to earn their way here, just like Notre Dame. Yes, okay, you lost to Notre Dame. You shouldn't have been in. Okay, well, we're going to have to prove that we belonged in if you're Notre Dame, because we've got to beat a top 10 Indiana team, number 2 Georgia, and number 3 Penn State. And if you can do that, then you deserve to play for a title, and these 2 teams did, which is further evidence that over the course of the season, what we're getting this title game is the teams that have always been the 2 best teams of college football in 2024.
When I go back through and I think of the journey of both teams, it is crazy how they got here. But I think the one thing is common, and I think that any rational fan on either side, any rational fan on either side can admit that these 2 teams deserve to be in the spot that they're in, right? Like, there's a lot of conversation on both sides about who lost to who and who had the better schedule. And look, when playoff times roll around, you have the opportunity to win 3 games to make it to this spot, which both Ohio State and Notre Dame did. Neither of them got the benefit of the doubt of getting a bye week, so they didn't have one additional game that they didn't have to play. And Brian, you just rattled off the 6 opponents that the teams combined to beat to get here.
And there were people picking against both of them in the first round.
Yeah.
There were I'm not doing this to call you out, Trevor. I'm saying you weren't alone in thinking Ohio State was done after Michigan. Like, that team is going to quit. They want their coach fired. They fought harder about a flag being planted than they did for the 60 minutes of the game. There was a lot of people picking against them. There were people picking against Notre Dame against Indiana.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if they can do this, if they can do that. And obviously a lot of people picked against Notre Dame against against Georgia. And there was obviously people it's not many, but some people that picked against Ohio State against Georgia. So it's not like that he's really clean pass and everybody just knew they were going to win the games they had to win to get there. There's a lot of people that doubted Ohio State's ability to beat Tennessee. There's a lot of people that doubted Notre Dame's ability to beat Georgia, and they handled business. And they handled business impressively. That's the other thing too, is like the Penn State game was the only competitive game that Notre Dame's played. I mean, maybe USC, but again, Notre Dame never trailed against USC. This is the most competitive game they've had since, this is the first time they've trailed by double digits all season. Ohio State was in a dogfight until the very end of this game. They were in a battle. So, I mean, they both kind of cruised in the first couple rounds to get here. So again, Trev, it's not like everybody just, oh yeah, well, of course Ohio State's going to be there. People jumped on that bandwagon really quick after the Tennessee game, but there was a lot of people that thought Ohio State was toast coming into that matchup against Tennessee. And then Ohio State was like, hey, we had a bad day. That's it. We're still Ohio State. Notre Dame, man, you don't belong here. You lost Northern Illinois. Hey, we lost Northern Illinois. I get it, but we're still Notre Dame. And we're still one of the 2 best teams in college football. And then they spent the next 3 months proving it. You think about this. Ohio State has 13 wins. Notre Dame has 14 wins. 11 of Ohio State's wins were by double digits. 12 of Notre Dame's wins were by double digits. So they both only had 2 games this year that they won that were not by double digits. I mean, again, Trev, every metric you want to look at, every efficiency number, this is not any team that kind of backed in and lucked in because Bama got in 2012 because Kansas State lost late and Oregon lost. And you know what I mean? This isn't any of those. These are the two teams that through the course of the season proved that they were the best teams in college football. And that's what makes us great. We're going to get a champion that earned it. And I think that's the beauty of this new playoff format. And again, I'll remind people, I was not on board when this first came out. I was not on board with the 12-team playoff, but I was wrong. It was great. It was great for college football. It was great for the regular season. The playoff has been great. The only thing that's been bad about the playoff is the coverage of it by ESPN. And they're harping on who should or shouldn't have gotten in. I mean, they're the ones that kind of took some of the shine off of the first round of the playoff, to be honest with you. So I mean, we're getting the two best teams. And I think that's the most important part to focus on. Now, who's the best? We're going to find that out in a week from now. We're going to find out who the best team is. Is it Ohio State? Is it Notre Dame? We're going to find that out. But I think we can feel good about saying we are getting the two best teams in college football this season. I also find it interesting, Trevor, that in the last 2 years, the most Southern team to play for the national championship in the last 2 years is Ohio State. So is the North rising in college football, man? And in a lot of ways it is. I mean, we're going to talk about why that is in the offseason. But, I mean, that's where we're at. And honestly, as someone from the North who, grew up in Ohio, of course, I think that's how it should be. But, it's going to be great. And also, Trev, too, the storylines for this game are going to be amazing. There's so many unique storylines about this game that make it look even better.
Yeah, man, it's awesome to hear. No matter who wins, right, whether it's Ohio State or whether it's Notre Dame, the national championship in back-to-back years will come from the North, which I know just have to really bother some of our friends down south who believe that football runs through the South. And look, from a recruiting standpoint, like a high school standpoint, there is some truth to that. I understand that. Yeah. Right. But, it's refreshing, because obviously Notre Dame, Ohio State are not sympathizers to the SEC in the slightest. And we hear every single offseason about how football runs through the South and you have to get through, the Alabamas of the world, the Georgias of the world, the Texases of the world, if you want to be considered elite. And Notre Dame and Ohio State did that. They got through Georgia. They got through Texas to get to this standpoint. And so now I think you can have a healthy conversation in the offseason around, you have to go through Notre Dame. You have to go through Ohio State. You have to go through like a Penn State who played in the semifinals, right? To get to the upper echelon now of college football. So the narrative switching a little bit is a really, really fun topic to talk about, man.
It is. And as Archer pointed out, I mean, the two best teams in the SEC this year both got beat by these two teams in the playoff. Mm-hmm. And Alabama, the team that everybody thought should be in, got beat by Michigan in a bowl game. South Carolina, another team that everybody thought should have been in, got beat by Illinois. So it is interesting how it's all played out, Trevor. But for this season, we have the two best teams. The Texas very clearly wasn't one of the two best teams in college football. They were very good. Don't get me wrong. Georgia was very good. Penn State was very good. And every team in college football is flawed. Everyone, including these two teams, right? And neither one of these teams are, to me, beating 19 LSU. Neither one of these teams are beating 2018 Clemson. Although, well, I think these two teams would have a better shot against 2018 Clemson than they would 19 LSU. But you get the point that I'm making. They're not beating, 0-1 Miami. And those type of things, but they're the two teams that have played the best, that have been able to overcome the most. And it is interesting. It's two more teams that are built very similarly. And what I mean by that is, Trevor, is Ohio State really relied on impact portal guys, just like Notre Dame has relied on impact portal guys. But it's about impact, not volume. Ohio State doesn't have a lot of portal guys in their starting lineup. They have some. A couple of them are injured. Josh Simmons is injured. He was a transfer pickup a year ago. Seth McLaughlin is injured. They're All-American center they got from Alabama. But obviously Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard are two portal pickups. Caleb Downs is a portal pickup. Davidson Igbinosun was a portal pickup. But their impact guys, there's not a lot of them. A majority of their roster is still homegrown. right? I mean, a lot of the replacements for these injured offensive linemen are homegrown. All their receivers are homegrown guys. Their tight end is a homegrown guy. Travion Henderson is a homegrown guy. I think their entire starting defensive line are all homegrown guys. They have some rotation guys that were transfers. Kenyatta Jackson was a transfer, I believe. Tywone Malone was a transfer guy. They've gotten some transfers in. I'm not saying they haven't, but they're still primarily built through high school recruiting and then development. Notre Dame, same way. Notre Dame's not playing for a national championship this year if they don't go get Riley Leonard. They're just not. And you look at the impact he's had on his football team. You look at the impact that the Nick Jordan Clark and RJ Oben against Georgia, and you look at my bad, Kenyatta Jackson was a high school recruit for them. You look at some other guys that they've got. I mean, obviously the portal's been good to Notre Dame. You know, Rod Hurd had a big sack in this game. Mitch Jeter was a portal pickup. Both teams have to me handled building your roster the right way. Is we're going to fill needs through the portal. And sometimes it's going to be an impact player. Sometimes it's a depth guy like a Malone and a Jackson, guys like that for Ohio State. It's a Rod Hurd or an RJ Oben, and Notre Dame's receivers have obviously been complementary players, not stars. But it's still about recruiting and developing your own rosters. I still think that's the best way to do it. And I think when you look at 3 of the 4 teams in the playoff, they were heavily homegrown rosters. Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. I think Texas has probably had the most volume of guys that are playing that were portal guys that are impact guys. I mean, Matthew Golden was an impact guy. Silas Bolden, it was a transfer. Silas Bolden was a transfer. Quinn Ewers is a transfer. Andrew Makoba was a you know what I'm talking about. Makuba, yeah, is a transfer. They got Trey Moore. They've had a lot of those type of guys. So I think that's the other thing is that we're seeing about this game when you talk about what's at stake. I think what these two teams have both shown, so no matter who wins, I think there's going to be a narrative about how the transfer players impacted those teams. And I think it's a fair narrative. Like a lot of people were upset after the Georgia game when ESPN talked about how Notre Dame's portal guys were a big reason for they won. And they're like, well, and I'm like, guys, it was true. I mean, you look at what Riley Leonard did. Bo Collins caught a touchdown. Mitch Jeter nailed 2 field goals. RJ Oben had the huge strip sack at the end of the game. It's okay to say that they've done that. And I understood some of the frustration. And if Ohio State wins, there will be the focus on the Will Howards and the Caleb Downs and the Quinshon Judkins. But there needs to be a point made that the proper way to build a roster is not to be homegrown only the way that Dabo Swinney did. There's going to be times when you need to plug holes in your roster, and you've got to be willing to plug them. But the primary way to still build your roster is to bring in the Riley Leonards and the RJ Obens and the Jordan Clarks and next year the Malachi Fields and those type of guys and the Caleb Downses and the Quinshon Judkins and those guys. Bring them into a culture that is already established. And make sure you're bringing in guys that have bought in. Did you ever at any point in time watch Will Howard or Caleb Downs this year and think they weren't bought into the Ohio State way of doing things? No. Did you ever feel that way about Riley Leonard or Bo Collins or Chris Mitchell or Jordan Clark? No. But when you are revamping your entire roster with portal guys, it's a lot harder to get that buy-in. And I think that's something else that these two teams have shown, Trevor, by them getting to this stage. I do believe that Notre Dame and Ohio State are also showing there's a right way to build your team, and it's this way. Use the portal for impact, not volume. Build through high school recruiting and developing a culture from the time they arrive. Those are the big keys to me, Trev, that when you talk about what we're going to learn from this game, I think that's a very important ingredient that both of these teams and Penn State have lived by.
Yeah, man, it's an and, not an or. And that's how I view the transfer portal, right? The transfer portal is a very polarizing topic, right? Paying players and using the transfer portal and how many players jump in at first opportunity, how many decide to stay. And then you have still a few of like the OG type coaches, like the Dabo Sweeneys of the world, who believe it's like, no, like we trust in our guys, which you have to have both, right? You feel the immediate needs with transfer portals, which is exactly what Ohio State and Notre Dame did. But the basis of your team is still through high school recruiting and the pipelines that you've created in the offseason through different relationships in different high schools. So, there's a lot of similarities between these two teams, right? And we're going to talk about it all week long. But You look at, some of the injury issues that they've had along the offensive line. Both Ohio State and Notre Dame have had those issues, right? You look at the defensive coordinators. Al Golden and Jim Knowles are both going into their third year as defensive coordinators, and it's showing, right? All of those players on either side of the football are playing with clear minds. They are playing with a lot of velocity. They have a good understanding of the scheme that they're in. Both teams are highlighted by, I just labeled them like newcomers, right? Like transfer portal and incoming freshmen. For the offensive side of the football, you look at Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. And I mean, he's a true freshman. Kid's 19 years old, and he was number 2 in receiving yards in the Big Ten and number 1 in receiving touchdowns. Then you look at the Notre Dame defensive side of the football. Newcomer Leonard Moore. He wasn't a transfer portal kid, but he comes in, steps in for Benjamin Morris, and is now playing at an extremely high level in the playoffs.
Both freshman All-Americans.
Right. And then obviously all the transfer portal additions for either team that you had mentioned too. So to me, these teams are built and they are highlighted by, not built by, they are highlighted by some of the newcomers, whether it be true freshmen but at the end of the day.
And offensive coordinators.
Yep. But at the end of the day, when both teams started experiencing issues, right, with injuries and with shuffling lineups, who did they rely on? It was the kids that have been a part of these programs, respectively, for years, right? Notre Dame starts having injuries on defense. Who did they start relying on? They didn't turn to RJ Oben and say, hey, dude, what do we got? Like it was, hey, Howard Cross, Jack Kaiser, Xavier Watts, what do you got for us? For Ohio State, it's like, hey, there's some shuffling going around. There's some injuries on the offensive and defensive side. Who do they turn to? Emeka Egbuka, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, like guys that have been a part of each of these programs for years. And I think that's just another facet of this game that makes it all the more interesting because it isn't the one or the other, it's the both. It's not we're just only recruiting high school kids or we are building solely through the portal and getting every single big name and throwing a bag at them. You look at the numbers and like nil value that each team is like dishing out and distributing. They're relatively equal, right? So you just go through and you look, and it's really exciting. I think Notre Dame and Ohio State have modeled perfectly how you're supposed to utilize the portal and continue to build your team through high school recruiting. So a lot of fun storylines in this one, man. It's a lot of fun.
And then, of course, you have the Marcus Freeman playing against his alma mater. We're not going to focus a whole lot on that because I don't know that that's necessarily something that's going to impact the game at all. Mm-hmm. Just like we didn't focus a lot on Al Golden going against his alma mater last week. Right. We'll mention it because it is a cool storyline, but it's not something that's going to have a huge impact on the game, in my opinion. But, I mean, look, you have two teams with a lot of talent. You have two teams with very good coaching. You have two teams that have had to overcome adversity to get here. And Ohio State had to do it twice. I mean, Ohio State lost twice this year, and they had to bounce back both times. And I think they bounced back better the second time than they did the first time. And certainly have played good football. So I'm excited about it, Trevor. I think this is the matchup that I wanted. I mean, you and I talked about this. There's two schools of thought to Notre Dame winning a championship, and I would have been okay with either one of them because it would have meant Notre Dame winning a championship, right? And it was one is, hey, look, some teams knock these guys off and you don't actually have to play the top teams, and maybe you get the Arizona State, Boise State path or something like that. Or, hey, look, you got to beat the best teams. And I think the final piece when you look at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, Trev, and also from an Ohio State standpoint, but obviously we're a Notre Dame channel, so we care more about the Notre Dame standpoint on this is, would I have enjoyed a national championship no matter who it is? Sure. If I had to pick one, and I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I'm saying if they're going to win it, you look at it and say there's going to be no excuses from anyone. You can try, but it won't fly because they would have had to beat Georgia, who all of you thought was going to beat Notre Dame. And everybody talked about all of Georgia's flaws after the game. Not a lot of people were talking about them before the game. A lot of people talked about how good Penn State was, and Drew Aller played bad, and had nothing to do with Notre Dame's defense. It's total coincidence. But you also then go beat Ohio State, who's playing they're playing the best. They've been the most impressive team in the postseason, in my opinion. Yeah. And there's no excuses. And to me, that's more satisfying because that reminds me of the championship I remember as a kid. Like to win in 88, you didn't like, okay, well, shoot, we don't have Miami on the schedule this year, so we had an easier path. You had to beat, number 2 Miami. You had to beat number 4 Michigan. Think about it. Notre Dame that year beat five top 10 teams, 4 top 10 teams. Michigan was top 10. They were number 3, I think, or 9 when they played. They ended up in the top 5. USC was ranked number 2 when they played. They had to beat Miami, who finished year number 2, was ranked number 1 when they played. They had to beat West Virginia, who finished in the top 5. Like that's what you want to be. You know, what do you say all the time? To be the man, you got to beat the man. And who have we said of those tier 1 teams? It's Bama, it's Georgia, it's Ohio State. It was Clemson. I don't think they're a tier 1 program anymore. It's been 5 years since they won their last title. It's been more than 5 years since they won their last title. So I kind of knocked them out. And they're not playing. Ohio State hasn't won a title in over 10 years, but they're still that elite program where Clemson has not been for several years now. So it's those are the 3 teams. Texas is trying to prove they belong on that tier, and they showed in the playoff and in the SEC title game that they're not there yet. And Notre Dame has proven that they're to me they're on that level. This is the way you kick the door down and let everybody know that it's a done deal. There's no more conversation about it. It's a done deal, and that's what's at stake. So like you said, so many great storylines. You know, so 2 very teams built similarly. In regard to how they were constructed. They're not similar in how they go about their business on the field. We'll talk about that over the next several days. But as far as the philosophy of building your team, I think has certainly shown that they have very similar philosophies to each other. And so it's going to be an absolute blast, Trev, an absolute blast. And reminder, obviously, the game is going to be on Monday. It's going to be at 7:30 Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN. It's being played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And Ohio State comes into this game as a favorite, which is to be expected. I'll be honest, I was a little surprised it was as big as it was.
Yeah.
9.5, but it's already come down to 8. And I expect it to probably go down just a little bit more. But I think we're kind of in the range where it's going to be. I think it's going to be between like 7 to 8.5 now as it moves a little bit over the next week. And honestly, Ohio State should be the favorite right now. I mean, they're playing the best football at the time. They beat number 1, right? I mean, Notre Dame beat number 2, but Ohio State beat number 1, and I'm totally fine with that. So, but that's a little bit about the matchup, Trev. We're going to dive into more of the Notre Dame opportunity here next, but we just had to kick things off with that. It's such an exciting time to be a Notre Dame fan. It's got to be an exciting time to be an Ohio State fan. I wouldn't know. I'm an Ohio State fan. But I know my family's pretty fired up about this, and so it's a great matchup. 2 Northern powerhouses, 2 blue bloods. I mean, that's the thing is we can debate. You know, is this team a blue blood? Is that team a blue blood? There's no doubt that these 2 teams are.
Yeah, man. I mean, you go through and you look and you talk about how historic each of these programs are, which is another reason why this national championship just feels right. You know what I mean? Like yes, I understand some of our friends down south might not agree so, but it is, right? You have 2 programs who have combined for 19 national titles, 52 bowl wins, 1,939 all-time wins, and 14 Heisman Trophy winners. Each team has 7, right? And so you look at that and you look at like what's the rest of it? You take the names out of it, right? You take Notre Dame, you take Ohio State out of it, and you look at what do you want to see out of a national championship? You want 2 storied programs that fought to get there. I think that's a big key. Like you don't want 2 storied programs that one of them kind of like backed their way in and had the easier path in the playoff. And, you know, those narratives can kind of be eliminated. But that to me is what I think is fantastic. It's 2 blue-blooded programs that have proven really solid over the history of college football. And it makes for a lot of fun, man. This is going to be so fun to cover.
It should be noted, Trevor, that coming into the semifinals, Ohio State was number 2 all-time in wins in college football history. Notre Dame was tied for 4th with Texas. Notre Dame now owns number 4 all by themselves in all-time wins. So I just wanted to point that out to people, just as a reminder that's where we're at. So Notre Dame is now very much creeping up on Alabama and Michigan for the all-time win percentage as well. This season helped with that. They're at 7.32. Actually, they're a little higher than 7.32 because of the most recent game. And Michigan and Alabama are tied at number 2 at 7.33. Ohio State's number 1 all-time at 7.35. So again, it just backs up the notion that these are 2 of the all-time greats. And, you know, It's a classic. It's where you want to be. And as a kid who grew up in Northwest Ohio as a Notre Dame fan, and my entire family was Ohio State fans. I have one cousin. My cousin Angie's a Michigan fan, and I don't know how that happened. Fortunately, my Uncle Marty still loves her, right? He still calls her his daughter, so he hasn't disowned her. But she got all to talk all that mess last year, and I know that he's hoping to talk all that mess this year. And I'm hoping that I get to go back home for family reunions and talk all that mess. So we'll see how it goes, but just great game. I anticipate this being a very good game between two very good football teams, and that's how I expect it to be. So that's part one of today's show, guys. Just sort of an overview of this game. Reminder before we get the next part, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and be ready this week, folks. Make sure you carve out some time because we are going live every day, Monday to Friday, actually Monday to Saturday for sure. May end up going, I mean, Trev, you know, by the time we get to Sunday, we're going to be, man, there's still so much to talk about. Let's do it. But that's where we're going to be for these next 6 days. So make sure, buckle up, be ready for it. We're going to have a lot of fun this weekend. We're just getting started even on today's show.